TEDx Portland Year 13 is coming to the Keller Auditorium on Saturday, April 26. This promises to be Portland's most inspirational, educational day of the year with 10 talks, 1 interview, and 7 live performances. Headliners include soccer legend Christine Sinclair, Grammy-nominated rapper Logic, Ivan McClellan from 8 Seconds Rodeo, artist and public joy creator Mike Bennett, and many more. Tickets are on sale now at TEDxPortland.com. You can use promo code RADIO13 for 13% off. Mark your calendars for Saturday, May 3rd because CityCast Portland is hosting a block party in downtown Portland's Ankeny Alley in celebration of 503 Day, a totally real holiday. For 5 hours and 3 minutes, we get to celebrate everything we love about living in our great city with live entertainment, food, drinks, and so much more. Like local celebrities doing live band karaoke. Even Dylan T. Pickle has RSVP'd. And then we're going to cap it all off with a live taping of our show, CityCast Portland, the one you're listening to right now. Also, it's totally free. Find more information at our website, portland.citycast.fm. See you there. A survey earlier this year ranked safety as the 3rd biggest issue for Portland City residents, after homelessness and housing affordability. But we've also heard stories of small crimes like robberies or vandalism that are just never investigated by the Portland Police Department. Like, how does the department prioritize the calls that get a swift response and the ones that just go nowhere? Also, how are we doing stats-wise? Things appear to be getting better, but are they? So today on CityCast Portland, we're going to the source with Portland Police Chief Bob Day and Sergeant Matt Jacobson, who heads up the Detective Division's Major Crimes Unit. Together, they're bringing us up to speed with how the Portland Police Department is addressing some of Portland's toughest safety issues. It's Monday, March 31st. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Chief Day, Sergeant Jacobson, thanks so much for hanging out with us. This is great. We've been wanting someone from the Portland Police Bureau to come through, and I think we had the last person who's been on was Nate Kirby Glakowski. He's a member of the neighborhood response team. He was so much fun to have on, so thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Absolutely. I had the privilege of working with and then supervising Officer Kirby for quite a while. He's a 10.
Well, Chief Day, according to the PPB's public data portal, in January of this year, Portland had nearly, 700 reported assaults, roughly 350 burglaries, and over 550 reports of vandalism. When we're reading just the numbers, that's a lot of crime, not even including the stats on things like, homicide or motor vehicle theft. But I'm curious, how are we faring compared to other cities of our size?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things when it comes to crime stats in our country that make it a little bit challenging. I mean, we all try to follow similar models through the FBI and other acronyms I could give you, but it really is agency dependent. So we do share information. Primarily, we look at, similar major cities, Seattle, Portland, Sacramento, San Jose. You get into the Los Angeles area, it's a little bit of an anomaly just because of size and scope. So it's a little bit challenging to do a sort of apples to apples comparison because there's so many variables. In regards to Portland overall, we do know that post-pandemic 2021 and into 22, we saw significant increase in crime reporting in numerous categories, not just our serious, fatal traffic accidents and homicides, but as some of the crimes that you just mentioned, as well as just an increase in crimes such as vandalism, theft, property crimes in general. So all of that really spiked several percentage points higher than it's ever been. And in 2023, we began a real robust effort to try and tackle those numbers. And so far, I'm proud to say we've been successful in doing so the last couple of years, seeing those numbers come down, but they are still not at an acceptable level. And they're certainly not at the pre-pandemic levels we were experiencing 2018, 2019 timeframe.
Yeah. Well, how does the department determine which of these crimes get investigated? Because that just seems like such a deluge, I'm assuming you would have to have some sort of triage.
Yeah, so I'll give you a high-level basic intro, and then I'm going to ask Sergeant Jacobson to give a little bit more detail from the investigation side. But, everything starts at the patrol level. So a basic 911 call is the beginning and the entrance into the system. And it's at that point where decisions are made in terms of, what's going to require more follow-up, where are additional resources possibly going to be assigned. For example, an officer may be on a traffic accident and make a determination or be told by medical that this is going to be a fatal or a possible fatal accident. That's going to require a different response than if somebody were going to be injured but survive. Same thing when we're out on the scene of, a violent crime and they're making those assessments. So the officers begin there, and we have people such as Sergeant Jacobson and others that are experts in the area of investigations that they can then call upon 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's numerous people available to then maybe do a phone consult, say, hey, here's what we have and here's what it's looking like. So those are decisions that are made in real time. For, more routine calls, for example, your house has been burglarized and we show up, that's going to be a standard report taken. And then, if there is a likelihood or maybe not that it'll be investigated, and that's going to probably fall more towards, some type of precinct follow-up unless it gets rolled up into a larger investigation. But then once we start to see these, what we would consider to be these cold calls, like an assault, but there's no suspect around, a robbery, there's no suspect, there's nothing happening with immediacy, those are the cases that get referred to the detective division. I'm going to ask Matt to talk a little bit about both that when he gets that call in the middle of the night and kind of how they do that, and then also about how they take those cases and assign them as they come to them maybe a day or two later.
Yeah, and just real quick, Sergeant Jacobson, something that Chief Day just said when he kind of gave a scenario like, hey, we decide which burglaries we investigate and which ones we don't. Like, could you maybe go into specifics of that? Because I know people listening are like, what? You're not going to investigate my burglary? So we just want to go in a little deeper on that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on a high level, we look at each individual incident, which myself or my counterpart in another detective unit, like our sex crimes unit or child abuse team, domestic violence unit, when we review those reports on the back end, the first thing we look at is the severity of that crime, that incident, followed pretty closely by, is there an ongoing threat to others? Is there a threat to the community, such as a case in which somebody's doing multiple robberies or multiple of some sort of crime? And then finally, we look at the impact of the overall community safety. This incident may not be a severe person crime, but when you look at kind of how we respond to that fear of crime in Portland also, it may be something that we want an investigator to take a look at. The chief mentioned the middle of the night phone call, which I got one last night.
Oh, man.
And oftentimes it's working with our patrol officers to make sure that certain things are done on that front end that help facilitate and support that back end investigation.
Right.
Those are the expertise that my detectives have, that we have here, that help those cases be set up to be solved down the road. We also respond to assist in the field and usually with custodies of somebody that's been arrested for generally a Measure 11 crime in the state of Oregon, where we go and actually assume that investigation in real time, even if it's 3 a.m, to help shepherd that case through and then conduct any follow-up on the back end.
Could you remind us what a Measure 11 crime is?
Absolutely. So Measure 11 is a law in the state of Oregon that dictates that for certain crimes, there are mandatory sentencing requirements. There's quite a long list of them, but generally they're all person crimes, which a person's been victimized.
Gotcha. Well, this next question is actually for you, Sergeant Jacobson. You oversee the Detective Division's Major Crimes Unit, which investigates these types of crimes we were just talking about, person crimes, which if you don't know, that's assault, as well as things as like bias crimes and robbery. Now, how does your team prioritize these investigations on a day-to-day basis? I know we talked a little bit about just general, but like the person crimes, I think those are the ones that most people are, it's a person crime,
Absolutely. Somebody was targeted, somebody was injured in some way, whether physically or emotionally, or received some sort of trauma from those. We review a lot of cases. I read a lot of police reports every week. It's kind of where it starts outside of those phone calls that we talked about. But the chief mentioned, having to triage those. And sometimes that means we have to make some hard decisions. But that said, we do have a way of prioritizing cases. I think, the first thing we look at is if somebody was seriously injured. That's a kind of a no-brainer. We want to make sure that we hold that perpetrator accountable. Then we look at things like, was a firearm involved, or shots fired? And then we look at some victim characteristics, like if this is a juvenile victim who was harmed, I think that takes a little bit higher priority. So it's really fairly common sense things that we look at. And then kind of at the end of that, I mentioned those repeated offenders. If we're seeing someone, even if it's not as serious as a crime, but repeatedly victimizing our community members, that gets a little bit higher priority as well, to make sure we interdict that pattern.
Right. Like if you're like, is it James again? And,
Yeah. And
I mean, we see those repeat offenders in neighborhoods where we're just like, oh, did they just smash another window and they're out again,
absolutely. And as big as the city can seem, I'll tell you that we have a phenomenal group of officers that know who those folks are, that take some initiative and often call me, even if it doesn't fit into the robbery, assault, or bias hate crime realm, and say, hey, we need a little bit of help addressing this issue. And we generally try to help them out to make sure that we address those.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we return, the biggest impediments that detectives face when trying to solve some of these person crimes. Have you heard of bookshop.org? They're an online marketplace whose entire mission is to support local independent bookstores. The way it works is every time you buy a book through bookshop.org, you can choose an independent bookstore to directly support with your purchase. Just select your favorite neighborhood shop from across the street or across the country. I know a lot of us are trying to wean ourselves off Amazon, so here's a great option. And you'll feel good knowing that with bookshop.org, your money is supporting your local community and helping indie bookstores continue to foster culture, curiosity, and a love of reading for generations to come. Use the code CITYCAST to get 15% off your next order at bookshop.org.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
What are the biggest impediments that detectives face when they're trying to solve these types of person crime cases? I mean, aside from there's no leads,
The fact that there may be no leads is indeed why we have a job. So that's why we're here. I think that our relationship with victims and people being able to feel comfortable coming to the police is an impediment we see. Not necessarily just the trust of the police, but perhaps worrying about some sort of retaliation or their standing within their specific community. We span the entire gamut of our population. And there are some communities in Portland that really don't value cooperating with the police. Past that, we talked about that volume. We talked about making sure that we have the time and resources to dedicate to that case. I mentioned we assign a lot of cases to our detectives. And so sometimes there's just not enough hours in the day to get everything done that we would like to do. And I think finally, it's really just the continued evolvement of the technology we're using, the different ways people are communicating. And so it's always a constant learning game to see how we can be on the cutting edge of investigative techniques.
Right. So that's so funny that the first one was like the old snitches get stitches impediment.
We're only as good as the information that we are able to obtain. And that's been the case, I think, for the complete history of police work. So those really person-to-person interactions and getting information from folks is exactly where it's at.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, for example, a smash and grab or just a broken window in general. I bring this up because it's what I hear the most in my particular neck of the woods in St. John's. Actually, my coffee shop that I go to has had a broken window. Every time they replace it, it gets broken again, and they just stopped. They just have a board now, and they're like, whatever, man. It's going to happen. So how does your team go about investigating something like that?
So Before moving to our detective division, I was the sergeant of the Central Precinct Neighborhood Response Team. Each precinct has a neighborhood response team. They handle all sorts of different crimes and initiatives in the precincts. First and foremost, with a chronic offender like that, we really lean on our community. We lean on the street knowledge that officers have, is really trying to figure out who it is. Sometimes, even if we're not able to prove that that person did that crime, simply a contact with that person and letting them know we're onto them can help mitigate that a little bit. Really, it's making sure we're getting those reports from our community. I'm going to pass to the chief here in a sec, and I think he can speak to the importance of our partners within our community to report those crimes.
Well, just real quick, the reason I asked is because a lot of these businesses, they actually have video proof, they have pictures, they have these things. And so that's why they're frustrated, because they're like, look, it's this guy right here. And then they'll take a picture and he's walking in front of my my place again right here. And so I guess that's why people are confused. Like, well, what else is needed, from the community?
Yeah, so it's a couple thoughts on that. I mean, one, we can always do better. I mean, there's an expectation that we have of our members to follow up, to, be responsive, to be engaged, to take the report. If there's evidence, I would expect them to collect that evidence and, to the best of their ability, conduct an investigation. Historically, that level of commitment and follow through has waned, just like in any organization, in terms of employee standards and performance. And I think we're coming out of a time period where there was great hesitancy to really want to engage or feel like there was a desire for the community to even want to have us be a part of these solutions. And that has switched now. The pendulum is certainly in favor and desirous of Portlanders wanting a relationship with their police department, and the police department wanting a relationship with Portlanders. But we have a generation of officers who came through 2021, 22, 23 with really not that understanding and experience. And the officers we hired in 20 and 21 really spent the bulk of their time just managing the crisis on our streets around protests and demonstrations. So there's an experience quotient. These are not excuses, by the way. I want to be very clear. These are not excuses. They're not acceptable to me, but they're the reality. I don't want to shy away from what's happening on the ground. Second of all, we know one of the challenges a lot of times with small businesses in particular is it's a significant commitment requirement to participate in the criminal justice system, right? So when we take somebody into custody, then there's a willingness, to follow through, to prosecute, to come to court, to sign a complaint. And I know several of them would if we were able to bring those cases forward, but I also know that's a burden on them, and sometimes they don't. They want the person arrested, they want the person dealt with, but they don't really have the time or the ability to commit to the follow-through piece, which is not user-friendly, particularly if you're trying to 1-2 person show you're trying to manage. And then the courts and the lack of public defenders, just on and on and on and on,
Right.
The system breaks down. None of that is acceptable. None of that is an excuse. My messaging to particularly small business and the example you used in the coffee shop, we need to be diligent to gather the information and to still try and affect the arrest and interrupt that behavior. And I can tell you it's happening more than it was in the past, but it's not where we want it to be. But I've seen examples of this throughout the Bureau where I'm seeing more flyers, more self-initiation by the officers with those videos, with those pictures, identifying people and making those misdemeanor cases. But it's definitely a work in progress.
Thank you. Thank you for going there. Well, Chief Day, earlier this year, the PPB put out a crime reduction plan that aims to both reduce crime in Portland and also to lower the call volume for patrol officers, which is a resource drain. Now, how is that possible? Like, what's the approach?
Well, the concept is that we don't have enough officers. Let me back up, put some context for a minute.
Sure.
The system is designed, and I'm talking about policing in general. You call 911, your coffee shop gets broken into, a police officer shows up, police officer takes that information, a police officer conducts the investigation, and there's some type of closure, an arrest, a clearance because we can't figure it out, whatever. Well, because of the sheer volume of crime, of calls coming in and the lack of officers to respond, we don't have that. We're not following that model. I go to your coffee shop, it's broken into, I get the information, 5 minutes later, I'm at a stolen car, 5 minutes later, I'm at a burglary, 5 minutes later, I'm at an assault. So, that coffee shop is not getting the attention that the system is set up to do. And so we're trying to find another way to prevent that coffee shop from being vandalized or being broken into or being the victim of a crime. And so we have began these mission-directed efforts around a variety of different areas that we're seeing a lot of reports, and as well as high risk, severity of risk or severity of crime, as Sergeant Jacobson mentioned. So take, for example, our street racing missions.
Right.
For a couple of years there, these intersections would be taken over, the Fremont Bridge would be taken over. And not only is it a huge inconvenience, but we started having homicides, started having accidents where people were killed. We had people flee the scene, even though we were not actively chasing them, and get into car crashes, having people die in fatal accidents. And so they would also generate a really high call volume where we are now pulling in numerous officers and nobody's even going to the coffee shop or the assault or whatever because we're trying to manage the street racing mission. Now we take a more coordinated, proactive, organized approach where we have officers dedicated to respond in conjunction with the airplane, in conjunction with other units, et cetera, so that we can still go to the assault call or maybe prevent the break-in at the coffee shop, because we're not all focused on just what's going on with the street racing mission. We've duplicated that now around human trafficking, around retail theft, around stolen vehicles, firearms, dope, et cetera. And we are seeing a reduction in call volume. We're not only, crime is going down almost in double digits in most categories, but we're also seeing a reduction in call volume. At the same time, we're increasing our hiring and trying to restore staffing to be able to support the model so that when an officer goes to the broken in coffee shop, he or she has the time to spend to do an adequate investigation. So we're coming at this from both ways, if that makes sense, trying to build up to fill the model so it exists, but also trying to be creative to drive down crime in other ways because we know the model isn't meeting that need.
Yeah, and I think, the detective division has traditionally been looked at as kind of its own entity within the police bureau. Something that the chief has been pretty clear on is that we're all one bureau working towards one mission. And I talked earlier about kind of going outside of our normal case work to assist on some of those other cases. I think that's a huge part of it, especially around those repeated offenders, which,
Right.
If we're able to interdict that person and stop them from committing that crime over and over again, then that's one less police call that we have to go to in the future. So it's all connected, and I think everybody in the bureau is working towards that mission.
One thing I just add, Claudia, one of the things that, policing is based on is the concept of swiftness and certainty. When you put a police car on the side of the road, people slow down.
Right.
Doesn't matter. They slow down.
I sure do. I sure do.
I could be driving a police car and I will slow down when I see a police car on the side of the road. And the reason we do that is because of the belief that if we don't behave, somebody's going to take action and that action will have consequences. So that's the concept behind policing. That's the concept behind accountability, is that there is a swiftness and certainty to it that then discourages that behavior. And we've lost that in some ways here in Portland for a variety of reasons that we aren't going to be able to cover on this podcast, but we've lost that in some way. And what I'm trying to establish, and what I am grateful that the Police Bureau is responding to, is creating an atmosphere and a belief of that swiftness of certainty. And as I said earlier, we're not there with the coffee shop in St. John's, but I'm hoping to get there, and I'm hoping we can continue to build upon that, because that will discourage that repeat offender, even if they're not taken into custody. More cops does not mean more arrests. More cops have shown, study after study, fewer calls for service, fewer reported crime, just like putting the police car on the side of the road. Doesn't have to stop anybody. Just being there slows people down.
Right. Well, I asked because, there was this DHM research poll asking like 600 voters in the Portland metro area just how they're feeling about public safety. And this month, just 12% of voters named public safety being, top of mind, as opposed to like 20%, which was like just last year. So I feel like the public is seeing improvement and they're worrying about other things a bit more. But I'm sure you've been poring over the data, and so I noticed there was a few headlines about a spike in homicides just this month, which is crazy. Just this month of March, Last we checked, 7 homicides. But the fact that out of the 10 this year, 7 happened in March. I'm just curious, like, what are you guys seeing?
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, the numbers are less, but that's really um, disingenuous or insensitive. The fact that that's 7 Portlanders' lives that are lost in the month of
Right.
March, which is unacceptable. The primary role of policing in America is for sanctity of life. That should always be remembered, and the cost of any life, regardless of decisions, circumstances, behaviors, experience, is too much. And so, um, we're very diligent in that and very committed to those crimes that affect, obviously, loss of life. The other challenge is, homicide in itself is, of course, very dramatic and very permanent in terms of its impact and loss, but it's also very personal in the sense that it's usually relational, it's usually emotional acts.
Hmm.
They're difficult to interdict. They're difficult to interfere. It's oftentimes the expression of maybe, long-standing issues that don't have anything to do with law enforcement. They're social, they're societal, they're familial, whatever it might be. And being able to interdict that is pretty difficult. Although I will say the city in the last couple of years has made a concerted effort, particularly in our Black and gang affected communities, to try and minimize some of that. And we are seeing a decrease in violence, specifically in that community. But we're seeing an increase in the houseless community around
Right.
violence. And then, other tragedies that may or may not be connected to the March homicides, I'm not aware, but, you have domestic violence and things like that. So I would say anytime that we see this number of loss of life in a short time span certainly makes us question and take a look at our efforts and where we're placing our energy and our time and our resources. I can tell you we don't see a trend at this moment. They do appear to be very independent of one another. They do
Hmm.
not appear to have an association specifically, but equally, as concerning as we move forward. And I think it's really an effort. When we talk about crime, we also talk about the fear of crime. The
Hmm.
fear of crime is much more damaging to a community than even the actual crime itself, because we all have experience and we cannot not believe our experience. So maybe we know somebody, we've heard of somebody, maybe we've had a personal experience, and that then forms our belief.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that belief is wrong. I'm not questioning that belief, but that forms our belief system around how we are experiencing the community as we travel about. And when we see, 7 homicides in the month of March, that can certainly, cause people to be fearful and concerned for their own safety, even if those acts were individual and unique in nature. It definitely has harm and cost to the community as a whole.
Right. Well, are you seeing any indications so far this year that we're trending in the right direction? I know it's only like March, but like, is anything trending good?
Yes, and I was just looking over here because literally had the numbers on Monday. And so last 2 years, March 16th, 2023 to March 15th of 2025. So that's actually a 2-year window. We're down about 29% in homicides. Aggravated
great.
assaults. Aggravated assaults are up about 4%. But fatal shootings are down 17%. Injury shootings down 29%. Non-injury shootings down 25%. Rape down 2%, simple assault down 6%, domestic violence 1%, restraining order violation down 25%. Burglary is down 3%, car prowls down 17%, motor vehicle down 31%. So, we're up in shoplifting. We've been encouraging a lot of reporting of shoplifting. We've been doing a lot of stuff in the area of retail. So shoplifting's up 29%. Overall reported
Wow.
vandalism is down 22%. So those are some rough numbers. So we are seeing progress over the last 2 years, but we were so far afield for so long that, we're just trying to get down to a manageable number.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, it appears things are trending for the better, but I know that you guys are pretty tough on yourselves, as I'm hearing. So just thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for taking the time to come and hang out with me. I hope that this now that you know what the show's like or what it's like talking to me, that you feel comfortable coming back on, because there's other stuff we'd love to talk to you about. I know this was just like a little check-in, like, how are we doing, But for sure, like, for one, want to talk about the massage parlors, just what's going on there. That's a whole other episode. And so if you guys, I don't know, anytime in the next few months, feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you back.
Well, thank you very much. And speaking on behalf of the Bureau, we love to be a part of it. Anytime we get our voice out there and share, and it's important to me. So don't hesitate to ask if something's top of mind, and maybe it can't be myself or Matt. Maybe next time you get the varsity. So thanks for playing with the JV today anyway.
Yeah, thank you. We can find you somebody better than me for sure. But we thank you for your nice words. We do have an interesting job. I think it's important we get out and talk to the community about it and make sure they understand really kind of the inner workings of what we do. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.